Today we're going to see one of the new features added to Xojo 2022 Release 4. In fact, this feature is a new option added to the Build Settings section for macOS apps. Now, when you compile your apps for macOS, you will be able to set the minimum macOS version required in order to run the app. By default, this field is set to macOS 10.14.0, which is the minimum supported version for macOS deployed apps created with Xojo, as stated in the documentation. So if nothing is entered in this field, your apps will have to have macOS 10.14.0 as their minimum required macOS version in order to run. Of course, you'll be able to enter any other value setting here, setting the major, minor, and bug version numbers, or just the major and minor version numbers, like 13.1 or 12.6.2. And while 10.14.0 is the minimum supported version, we know that there are a lot of apps out there created with Xojo that can run in even lower versions of the macOS operating system, so you will be able to set those values too. In that case, just remember that these versions are not officially supported by Xojo, so make sure to test your apps in depth to make sure that they will run without any problems when they run in macOS versions below 10.14.0. For example, some incompatibilities can arise, such as depending on certain controls or framework features that are used in your macOS app. In addition, the value entered in the macOS minimum version field will not have any effect when running the app from the IDE. So that means that if we set the minimum version to macOS 13.1, but we are running the IDE on a lower macOS version, then we'll still be able to continue running and debugging the app from the IDE without that minimum requirement in place. So if we compile the macOS app and try to run it from that same computer with a lower version than the one set in the build settings, the operating system will display a dialog letting us know that we can't run the compiled app because the macOS version is lower than the one required by the app. But when we run the same app with the same build settings from the IDE, we can see how to do it without problems, which is very handy in order to test how the app works. In summary, with the new build settings for macOS, you have more control about the required macOS version to run your app.